Good morning. Good morning. It's 10 a.m. where I am. It might be 11, 12, 1 or 2 or 2:30 maybe where you live in Canada. But it's great to have you here. My name's Doris Livingstone. I'm the Action for Canada homeschool lead. And we've got a great session here. We're going to be learning about learning styles of our kids and teaching styles of us as parents and how we interact with our kids. Anyways, this is an exciting moment. We are going to introduce and bring our speaker in. And Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, we're excited to have Patty Marler. She is a government and media relations representative for HLSDA Canada, promoting and protecting homeschooling. Her advocacy work has resulted in many post-secondary institutions creating specialized home education admissions policies and has helped lay the foundation for the notification-only option in Alberta. In addition to her advocacy work, Patty provides direct support to home educating families across Canada, and her passion and home education experience have made her well received at conferences as a speaker across the country. Patty is passionate about helping homeschool parents build a quality education and seeing home educated children flourish. Patty holds a Bachelor of Science, major in psychology, and has worked as both social worker and a career counselor. She is also the co-author of 9 career planning books. Previously, Patty was the President and Government Liaison of the Alberta Home Education Association, AHEA, and a founding board member of Parents for Choice in Education, Alberta. Patty and her husband, Jeff, homeschooled their 4 children from kindergarten through grade 12, knowing each child and teaching to their way of learning required a variety of teaching methods and educational resources. So welcome, Patty. I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. And you were talking about socialization, and I recently heard, I think his name's Michael Knowles, talk about socialization. And he said, students, people used to say that socialization was one of the main reasons people had concern about homeschooling. But now it's the homeschooled students who are the most socialized and the most prepared to be in the world and to work well and fit well within the real world. So that is off topic today because we're talking about learning styles, but I was really impacted by that when I heard that recently. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. We are today talking about learning styles. I have some information prepared, but we're gonna share just some of our own personal stories as we go as well. Homeschooling, the learning style of your child and of you and of your family can really have an influence on your approach to homeschooling. So your educational method can impact your homeschool. It can influence your child's ease of learning, their sense of accomplishment, the peace that you have in your home, and the enjoyment that you have with homeschooling. Ladies, I'm not sure about you guys, but I know there have been times in my life where what we have been doing doesn't fit with my, one or several of my children's way of learning. I just realized I jumped ahead here. So it doesn't fit with my child's or way of learning or our family's way of learning, and things just really don't go so well. Have you guys found that in your homeschooling as well?
I would imagine everybody would nod their head, especially if they're new and it's their 3rd week in or 4th week in and they're going, okay, what's going on?
Or even as they grow and develop, I've found that things change and you got to make adjustments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And when we started homeschooling, the reason we chose to homeschool was because I didn't want my kids to fall between the cracks. I didn't want them to not be able to learn. I didn't want them to be overlooked and not be able to read. Reading was really key for me. So I didn't want them to fall through the cracks. So to be very honest, when I started homeschooling, it was a temporary thing. We were going to do it for a few years, try it out, just see and make sure that our kids could read well. Fast forward a few years, and there was no way I was leaving homeschooling. The family benefits, the benefits to being able to tailor the education to each child and their way of learning, the ability for us to homeschool with God at the center of what we did, for us to be able to focus on our values, to be able to speak to our children in their hearts, to help them learn how to resolve conflicts. All of these things became a very significant component of why we homeschooled. And God ended up, how God plays these little, I won't say jokes, because he doesn't play jokes on us, but he provides us with opportunities to giggle sometimes. Well, one of my children, my goal was to make sure my kids knew to read, and one of my children had such struggles reading that it took us, years into their homeschooling in order for us to be able to grasp, the reading concept, which had me completely changing that approach to homeschool. Otherwise, my child never would have learned anything. She never would have had a sense of accomplishment. The peace in our home would have been absolutely gone, and we would not have enjoyed homeschooling if I had just stayed doing things the way we were doing them before. So so the other component to that is understanding our teaching preferences as well. So I think in a very specific way. And I know how I had one child who thought very similar to me. Their learning style, their way of thinking was so in line with mine that I could just almost off the cuff make a comment, and they could just very quickly be tracking with me. But we had other children where that did not happen. And so my way of thinking, I had to adjust that in different situations to make sure that I was communicating with my children in a way that accommodated their way of learning and not just my way of thinking. So, how does a child learn? Well, we're going to just take a look at a few different learning styles, just because I think it's important that we're aware of how different kids learn. But it's important to know that it's not just one way. You could have a visual learner who also learns, in several other ways. So we don't want to limit our child, but sometimes kids lean heavily on one or two learning styles. So some kids will learn visually. They'll learn lots seeing pictures, or by looking at diagrams and images, and they have this great spatial representation of things. One thing that we did with our kids that helped our visual learners a lot is that whenever we traveled, I would go to my local AMA, and I would grab 4 maps of wherever we were going, and I would give one to each of our children, and they had to follow along where we were going. If a 2-week vacation or a 1-week vacation or a 2-day vacation is a wonderful opportunity to do this, where you follow along on a map where you go, and you write the different interesting things that you see or do along the way. And this isn't just about vacationing. This is about being able to solidify the places that you've been, to follow a map, to be able to write down the different experiences that you have and be able to locate them on the map. That was something that I really loved. That was a visual sort of learning component for our kids.
I have to just interject here that we did a trip back east. We rented a motorhome and headed west. And this was just on when we were moving away from paper maps to GPS. And because it was a rental, they offered the GPS program in the RV, and I denied it because I wanted my kids to learn how to use a paper map. Well, my oldest took it on, and I said, well, whoever has the paper map gets to sit in the front because I have to hear what you're saying. And the other two were like, I don't want to use a paper map. They were like completely overwhelmed. And I realized at that, and they were in their teenage years, and I realized, like, even though we don't need a paper map today so much, although sometimes there's value in laying it on the table to see the big picture. What a skill still to learn, because it's a skill you use for other things, not just maps, right? And anyways, I love, Patty, I love that idea of actually going further and beyond that and writing things down, because they're learning as they write, they're going to remember things. And it could be one of their best trips ever. And then they'll remember their landmarks where you were driving. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wonderful. And my our children just recently pulled out some of their maps and saw that highlighted route that we took, and we were all talking about that. And then our children now are they're all graduated. We homeschooled from kindergarten to grade 12, and our youngest is 22 and the oldest is 31. But those things that we did, those activities, those, some of those visual things that we did really have stuck with them, and it's been really wonderful. Yeah. Okay, so on to number 2, which is, this is great because it helps us think about our kids and the way that they think and the things we can do. So next, and just to go back, the visual way of thinking, Charlotte Mason has a wonderful approach with a lot of visual learnings. Charlotte Mason, there's a big outdoor exploration component, nature drawing. So seeing things is a big component of, say, that one style of teaching your children. So the next way that kids can learn is auditory. They like to hear. They like to listen to podcasts. They like to listen to lectures. They like to have you talk about things, have group discussion. Music and rhythm can be incorporated, skip counting for learning multiplication tables. All of my kids learned their multiplication tables to a rhyme, to a rhythm. And at times I actually still hear them. I may not hear them, but I see them humming in their heads. So and they have let me know at times or recently, that they still use those rhythms to help them remember certain things. We learned the books of the Bible through, a rhythm that I created. So all my kids can recite the books of the Bible to a rhythm. So music and auditory processing can be a wonderful way to learn. But, in the same way that it can be a wonderful way to learn, sometimes it can be a barrier as well. I was a big reader to our children, huge. We read all the time. I read novels to them. And I had one child who I would ask questions, of what we read, and they could not answer the question, just could not answer. And finally said to me, I cannot hear the things that you are reading to me. When you read to me like this, or when I listen to an audio story, it's too slow and I get lost in the distraction of my own thoughts. So I have to stop reading to this child and just give them their own book to read. and they could process it much better. It was really difficult for me, but it was how they learned. So, we have to recognize that some of these can be skills, but some of them can be real challenges for our kids as well.
I love that dialogue. Like just even that you had that dialogue with your child and they were self-aware enough to be able to say it like that. That's great.
Yeah. Well, another way that people use is, hands, kinesthetic body movement, and we often say that like boys are often much more kinesthetic. Some, that's not to say that girls aren't, but very often boys can be very busy. They need to touch things, and some of my, I have both. So some girls and some boys, they had to touch things. They had to, move. I've heard of families, I never did this one, but who teach their kids to read by drawing in sand or drawing in cornstarch. Very kinesthetic. I had one child who, while we read, they had to throw a ball against the wall, the whole time. Quite distracting, but it was what they did to, to stay connected, to stay engaged with what we were doing. So, and they remembered, but if that child had to sit still while we read, they never would have been able to sit as long, to hear as much, to be able to incorporate as much, because they had to be moving while we were doing that reading.
Yeah, I had one of those.
Me too.
Yeah. So lots of the key is to be able to adapt to some of these learning styles. Verbal, so the child who didn't want to hear wanted to read, wanted to write, wanted, things in writing. Give me that, I'll process it myself. Some kids are just verbal learners, and some are very logical thinkers as well, using reasoning to learn, debate. And that's one thing that I really encourage families is when your child maybe disagrees with you or questions you, these are really important skills for you to help them build on. Some kids learn by debating. They're reasoning in their head. Some are just trying to be the devil's advocate to have you help them understand why your position may be right and why another position may be wrong. And they may be using these argument, or sometimes it's safer for us to call them debating skills, so that they can use their logic and their reasoning skills to grow and understand, to be able to make associations for themselves, and for them to be able to build on their learning and understanding of things. And then, many kids will like to learn in social settings. When our kids were older, I would get our kids together in groups, and once a week we may study biology together. We would have a curriculum that we would use. The kids would do most of the work at their homes, but once a week, the parents and kids would come into my home. We'd talk about a topic. We'd look at relevant YouTubes. We'd do experiments together. Then we'd snack and have popcorn and play in the backyard for a while during our 15-minute break, which often went longer. But it was a way for our kids to learn in groups and to be able to be together and do some group work together. But not all kids like that. Not all kids learn well in groups. Some learn much better on their own and get completely overwhelmed in group settings. So even when we did, say biology together, that's, when you're learning, grade 12 level biology, and you do it as a group, sometimes it's not the group that is the best part, it's that scheduling. that keeps you committed to that program. That's completely valuable. So some kids in this group still were solitary learners and didn't, want to participate in those group activities. And that's okay. That's the beauty of homeschooling, is that they don't have to. They can learn the way that they want to. So yeah, so these are some individual learning styles that I think it's important for us to think about. And there are some kids who have exceptional abilities. Perhaps they have dyslexia, and have a real hard time thinking in terms of words, but are incredibly astute at visualizing and conceptualizing, and they can take like a flat image and in their head turn it into a 3D picture. Or they can manipulate like mechanical parts and think about what it would look like if you did something to made some sort of manipulation to it. So when we look at those strengths of our kids, then we're able to teach to those strengths instead of, just teaching the way everyone perhaps in a brick and mortar school learns, and missing out on those unique opportunities and skills that our kids have. And that's the same with like auditory processing challenges as well. Some kids, may be able to hear, but they may not, they may have to have things provided to them in a very structured, organized manner in order for them to move on. And if one piece is missing, they may have to have that missing piece reintroduced in order for them to move forward. So understanding our kids can really, I'm just going to throw back here. Well, too bad that takes so long, but throw back here to that child's ease of learning, their sense of accomplishment, the peace within your home when you're not having to argue with them because they're enjoying or understanding what you're doing, and then just their enjoyment in homeschooling too.
Yeah, it's definitely more exciting when you start tapping into the different styles, because I was raised in the public school, so I had to learn how to understand the different learning styles. And out of frustration with one of my kids, I moved over to music, and I'm a musician, so I resonated with that. And then like the songs were like all about the alphabet, and there were songs in the whole program, and wow, did she ever take off after that. So and then I used it for all of the kids, because they all, in the background, I just played these songs and they're listening over and over. It's in there. And I also wanted to say, like, this was pretty important to me in the beginning about why I chose to homeschool. I couldn't see it at a very young age that they were very different, but as they turned 6, 5, 6, 7, 8, I'm going, wow, they're really different. And so grateful that even then, that was one of the motivators for me to make sure, like you were saying, Patty, I wanted my kids to learn how to read. I didn't want them to fall through the cracks, and tailoring to their learning style was a game changer.
That's one of the best parts of homeschooling, isn't it? That they're not in a classroom of 30 kids. They're at the kitchen table. They're, like in the yard. We can cater to them as much as we can. That was a breakthrough for me too. I had a kinesthetic learner that I knew from day one, everything had to be a game. I had to figure out how to make everything creative. She needed to jump on it. She needed to throw it. She needed to, yeah, she really challenged my creative skills for sure.
Yeah. And I think through those experiences is when we start to realize our teaching style. And anyways, I'll let Patty go into that, because you've got all that prepared for us. Yeah.
Yeah, Doris, I love though what you said about knowing your style as well. Knowing our learning style is very important too, because sometimes we don't even think about the way that we learn, and we just assume that everyone learns the way we learn. And so when we understand too that the way we learn and teach, may or may not work with our kids. And it's important for us to be able to adapt as well.
Mm.
Okay, so the family learning style, how do you approach education, with all of these things? So when I'm talking to especially, a new family or a family who's, wanting to change the way they do things because things aren't quite working, the first things that I'll say is, figure out the way your child learns, and then look at how you want to approach education with your children. There are so many educational methods that are available. I have some listed here, and you're going to go, but they don't have to be overwhelming. So what I suggest is that families head over to homeschool.today and take the Your Homeschool quiz. So this homeschool quiz is going to have a whole list of questions here. Things like, I want my child to be involved in choosing what we learn. And then you say, yes, that's important to me, or well, whatever. Or no, that is absolutely not important to me. And it goes through a list of about 20 questions or so. And then based on your answers for how you would like to approach, your family's learning, it's going to plot out a learning method. One of these learning methods is going to sort of plop it out. In this case, it was unit studies, and it's going to give you some information about unit studies and what it looks like to approach homeschooling from a unit study perspective. And so that is so wonderful. But you might be going, some of those questions I answered, not important, but, it kind of is important. And I wasn't sure, how to do that. Well, the beauty of this is just play it again. At the bottom here, you play it again, you re-answer those questions, and it's going to give you a summary of another method of home educating that may be good for you. And so take this sort of quiz a number of times, see the various methods that are suggested for you, and maybe one of these will work. Now, if you provide completely different answers every time, it's going to give you, completely different approaches, which are good to look at. But when you find a few or a couple or a few that are most consistent with the way you think, I think it's going to be very valuable. Now, still on the homeschool.today website, under resources, all of the educational methods are outlined here. So, Charlotte Mason, a very nature drawing approach, classical, where it's very, there's a lot of rote, there's different levels of approach in a classical approach, very, very good, solid education, rigorous education, very methodical. You may be interested in an eclectic approach where, this was sort of my way of doing things. You take a little bit from Charlotte Mason, you take a little bit from classical, you take a little bit from independent learning, do a little bit of project-based, and you kind of mix it together to form your homeschool. All of these different ways of learning. When you click on each one, you're going to get some information about the learning style, and you're going to get the strengths of it, some things to consider, like if your family is, you have, a spouse who works shift work and you like to vacation a lot, you're going to have to work really hard to fit in, say, a classical approach. I'm not saying it's not possible, but these are things to consider, and then some resources for it. So each method, educational method, is going to give you a breakdown somewhat like this, so you can take a look at them. Any thoughts from you ladies on, sort of how you approached homeschooling? Sorry, one other thing. I'm jumping in after asking you, but there's one thought I have. My approach to homeschooling, was not consistent over the decades of homeschooling that we did either. Sometimes we may have taken more of this approach, sometimes more of this approach. We did more of a classical approach when I was wanting our kids to understand languages and look at Latin, and and high school was a completely different approach. And for each child, high school was actually a completely different approach. So, you're not locked into one if you choose a method. But there are certain subjects where it's good to remain consistent. So like K-6, it's really good to remain consistent, when you're choosing a math program. That's what we'll talk about a tiny bit later, like the math program, and the English program. But some of the other stuff can really be, manipulated more.
Yeah, I'm almost identical to what your journey has been. I actually, when I discovered the Charlotte Mason approach, it actually almost was a relief. It made teaching a couple of my kids a whole lot easier. And then, of course, I was eclectic. It was a little bit of everything, depending on the subject. Sometimes we did unit studies. Sometimes it was with 2 kids. Sometimes it was with 3. And then like your kids as 2, Patty, as they got older, mine too, like I found by about grade 7, they became almost self-directed. They just knew the drill. They went, okay, if I get up at whatever time and I get all this done, you mean I can be done by lunch? Instead of, like, come back. Because as soon as I was on the phone, this is before cell phones and we had a home business. As soon as I was on the phone, the kids were gone. They knew mom was going to be on the phone and they took off. So yeah, we just figured it out. You just figured out, but they too learn after a while, especially if they started in the earliest years, that in high school, there is a little bit more, I think, consistency and diligence required, depending on, again, the subject, and each child, again, is different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's really good. I'm very similar. Yeah, it had to be a little more creative in the younger years, but as they got through high school, I found that one of my children was fairly self-directed by like about grade 7, but then the other one was probably more like grade 9 or grade 10. Like she just needed some more help. So yeah, it just varies with each child too, and being able to go, okay, well, what worked with one child actually doesn't work with the other, and being willing to rethink some of our teaching styles or our curriculum, or okay, well, this worked with with this kid, but maybe not with this one. So yeah, very good. I love that you've outlined all of those too, because it took me a lot of years to try to figure out what's Charlotte Mason, what's this, what's this. So that it's okay to combine or to make adjustments as we go. I think that's really important.
And I think what you said there is really important, because sometimes people will look at stuff like this when they're starting homeschooling, research it and go, okay, this is the way I'm doing it. But we forget that what we're doing, how we're doing changes. And it is really good to come back to this stuff a couple of years later, and then a couple of years later, and then a couple of years later, and revisit and go, are there modifications I can make based on where we are now that's going to make our homeschooling, run smoother, work better for our family. Yeah. So, okay. So sort of the last kind of thought, it's somewhat different. But you know, in your homeschool program development, you have your ways of thinking. But when you're developing your program, I think these things are really important. I think it's important for you to decide what's most important to you and for your child's academics and for their life. So you need to choose, because every child is going to be different. You have an exceptional needs child, your academic goals for them are going to be different than you have. If you have an academically gifted child, you're going to expect way more for that academically gifted child than for a child who, you know, struggles to read. You know what? I'm going to take that back. You're going to have a different way of approaching it. I had very high goals for my child who struggled to read. She just had to do it in different ways. Okay. And then teach from your worldview perspective. You know your values, you know your beliefs. Make sure you teach from that worldview perspective, and teach in ways that are important, that develop your child's character. What's most important for your child's development? Do you need to focus this year on commitment, on focus, on you know, a value like, I was going to say not lying, but you know, that's something we should always work on perhaps. But you know, different character traits and stuff like that. And then finally, there's a lot of information available on that homeschool.today website. There's a lot of workshops, and at HSLDA, we also have a lot of workshops and support and things available to families.
That's great. I love your HLSDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I became a member just before I started homeschooling and didn't regret it one day all the way through. I just love the organization, love supporting them.
Yeah, me too. I was a member right from day one, and I was glad to know they were there. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I will chat just a little bit about HSLDA and what we do then. HSLDA Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Our mandate is to enable, empower, and protect Canada's homeschool success. So we provide legal protection, homeschool support, and advocacy. We have you know, our lawyers say prevention is the key. So a lot of legal guidance is given right up front when our members join, a lot of information to help you make sure that you have a solid, protected homeschool. Right away, you get this notes from HSL's legal team that provides a lot of information on how to protect your homeschool, and there's a Protecting Your Homeschool series. We provide legal guidance, so current and reliable information with helpful resources. So for example, when education policies in your province change, we notify families right away. We provide current advice and assistance on notification or registration or what's required in your province, and provide links and fillable forms when that's possible. We talk about homeschool documentation recommendations. So in many provinces, they're going to say you have to provide us with an evaluation. Well, we provide recommendations on what that evaluation might look like, what your reporting might look like to the legislators or the bureaucrats who oversee this. So we help to provide all of that, so you know how much, how little, you know, what should I be doing. When families have homeschool challenges, like for example, police or child welfare investigations, when there's medical interventions, and you know, communicating with healthcare providers, you know, becomes tricky because they start asking, you know, uncomfortable questions about your homeschooling. Or, you know, when families have kids, some who are in school and some who are not, there can be social relations that require, you know, advice from a lawyer, fostering, adoption, you know, other situations. As an HSLDA member, you have 24/7 access to a lawyer in emergency situations, and the lawyer will respond to your questions, you know, all for a fairly minimal fee. You know, you have access to legal answers to your questions. And then non-legal services. Some people have CRA reviews or citizen applications or CPP or jury duty letters that they need that our lawyers can provide. And then the support for homeschoolers. We have expert homeschool support for every stage of your homeschooling, getting started, preschool, elementary, high school, post-secondary. Just a little notice for everyone. We're working on a homeschool careers and colleges guides that's going to be coming out very soon. That's going to be very helpful for the high school and into post-secondary years. We provide exceptional needs consultations, curriculum consultations. You have access to liability insurance, and homeschool groups have access to information, to the insurance. Groups can get rebates for families, all sorts of things. And then in terms of resources that you get, there's a biannual homeschool review magazine. You have access to our portal of resources, templates, fillable transcripts, student and teacher ID cards, post-secondary guides, record keeping information. We created a homeschool planner that, you know, there's over 50 years of homeschool experience and input from lawyers on this homeschool planner to make sure that you meet all the needs for your province and the needs for your family. Not in a you have to do way, but in a this is how, you know, we're going to help you plan your homeschool with all these different things in mind. So this is an incredible resource. And then our digital library, we have over 2,500, you know, and audio books available to our members in our digital library. So if you think about how much your books cost you, you can save more than that much just in by using the digital library. And then our homeschool advocacy, you know, we have many people who just are members to say, we know that you stand up for homeschooling, for a parent's freedom to choose their educational method, their curriculum, their evaluation choices, where they teach and how they schedule in their peer associations. And we monitor laws, we monitor what's going on in the education world. We build coalitions with other like-minded organizations, and we connect with media. So that is what we do. So, yeah.
It's definitely expanded, and I love the whole library. That's pretty phenomenal to have that at your fingertips.
Yeah, that wasn't there in my, you know, until the very latter days of my homeschooling. And I'm thinking, man, if I'd had access to all these books, then, you know, there's so much money I could have saved in purchasing my own resources and even just accessing them at your fingertips. Like, I just love that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a tremendous resource, and same with homeschool.today. That website is loaded.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, for those listening in, that is on our website. Both links are on our website if you ever need to go back and try and remember all this. And our videos are also recorded and usually uploaded by the weekend, and they're also on Rumble, so you can re-listen to all of this, and you can share these videos with other people who may find this very important and relevant to their lives and helpful at this point. Patty, let's go back to talking about math.
Yep.
Yeah, and your thoughts about math.
About math? Oh, don't get me started. I love math. Uh, math, but most people don't, or many people don't, right? So, you know what? I think math is to be honest, one of the easiest subjects to teach. You can, there's so many good curriculum to use for math. I do encourage you to perhaps stick with one. Jumping between math curriculum, homeschool math curriculum, any math curriculum can be challenging because each curriculum is going to approach things in a specific sequential way. So some approach multiplication, as early as, say, grade 2 or age 7, somewhere in there, whereas others may even delay it until like the end of grade 3 or grade 4. So if you're switching math curriculum, you may miss out on some really important concepts because you're just jumping in at grade 4. But having said that, people do change, but just be aware of that when you do it. There's a lot of math games you can do, very natural approaches to math. And then the high school math, there's so many good curriculum. You can get into calculus, geometry, very advanced subjects through self-directed homeschool curriculum that where students learn online. I'm good at math, but I still didn't feel the need to relearn how to do derivatives in calculus. So I would just use an online program for that for my kids.
Yeah, and the online options are definitely there now. We tapped into that probably more in the senior high era for my oldest, who wanted to take on the calculus classes, and that worked for her. But that would have really done in my other kids, so we didn't do it that way for them. And again, that's all those years of learning your child's learning style. Let's also talk about, so it's beneficial to understand your child's learning style, also your teaching style, before you go spending all this money on curriculum.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that one. One thing that really concerns me is when people go on Facebook and say, what's the best math curriculum? What's the best English curriculum? And I think, that's, a really dangerous way for a family to approach that. Because of those things that we've already talked about. What if your child is, completely a manipulative, kind of student who needs to touch things, and all of a sudden they have a workbook that they have to complete where there's no color, it's just very rote. How are they going to function in that? They probably will, but they could function very better with a program that has math manipulatives that they could manipulate, that has color in the pages, that's going to capture their attention and their sensory way of learning. So, and that's why we provide the curriculum consultations as well. I always say, figure out the way your kid learns the way you want to teach, and then talk to a curriculum consultant, because you can provide them with a lot of information that's going to help them to help you choose something that's really good for your child.
And I think just going back to the math, mastery is really important. Like that's one of the biggest parts of homeschooling, is that you don't have to move on until they understand. Sometimes you have to kind of come back to a certain concept if their brains just aren't quite ready to receive it yet, or you can go at it from a different approach, but making sure they actually fully understand what they're learning before moving on was so key for us. Because if they only get like maybe 75% of their questions correct, that's 25% of their questions that they didn't understand. So being able to make sure that they fully understand that before moving on will set them up for success.
Yeah. And curriculum providers do an excellent job. I agree with trying to figure out how to say this in an inoffensive way to curriculum providers. I help my child learn to competency and then we move on. So I also don't feel beholden to curriculum when they provide a lot of opportunities to learn via many, many questions. If my child's learned a concept, I'm, moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually ignited one of my daughters when I said, okay, well, if you get 100% in, this day's work of the new concept, then you can go on to the next one. And she flew after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find a lot of curriculums, at least the one I used, it usually gave 4 or 5 pages within the unit. And like you were saying, well, both of you were saying, is if they've mastered it on the first page and it was built up already in the previous unit or units prior, and now they really get it. There was 3 or 4 pages. I said, you don't have to do those. If you want to, you can, but we can move on to the next one. And they were excited because for them, it's also a sense of completion and success that they need to feel. I know as teachers, moms, we like to know that, because we covered the unit today, I feel good. I can check my box, but that doesn't mean the child mastered it. And so when there's 3 or 4 pages of repetition, it's there for a reason. But if the child gets it and they're almost bored, it's okay to move on. Mm-hmm. And how do you learn that? I guess I can only speak from my own experience is when they're younger, you have time to learn their learning style, and it may work for that one and the second one or the third one, fourth, whatever. It's like they need more, they need something else. But the beauty of it is, and I this is going to be true for when they're older, is if they don't get it in a week, if they don't get it in a month, there was one time I went, okay, she's just not ready. Mm-hmm. This is way beyond her. We're just going to sit here and we're just going to, whether it's math or something else, we're just going to do this and stay here for a while because there's something about her physiologically. Maybe it's just her development. She's not ready to take on this. Mm-hmm. And so I either put it away for a month and we just get into something else and bring that into our homeschool for a season, a short season, or seasonal. The seasonal ones are fun. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. You can work your homeschool themes and topics around those as well. And then as she got older, I went, okay, she's ready. We can go back to where we were and continue on. And they've had a mental break too. Sometimes they're just taxed. Yeah. And they cannot take anything else in. And I mean, I do a lot of hindsight now, all these years later, I'm going, oh, nutrition was a big part. Had I known that, she wouldn't have had this brain fog after lunch. It always happened after lunch. So those are other things. They're not just schooly things, but these are things I've learned over the years. And so as parents and as moms, you will learn how to do all that. You have time. You got a whole week, you got a whole month, you got a whole year, and then you get another year after that. My goal was, as long as they're reading by the time they're 10 or something, you just set these big goals and then you break it down and then just keep going. Yeah. There's more to homeschooling than just the academics.
Yeah. And not pushing your child to frustration too. Cause like I'm saying 100% on your math. Well, it might not be for that child, but just being able to understand, okay, they're not ready for this, or this isn't their thing. So maybe this is okay. Or just understanding your child and knowing when you need to switch things up and when you need to take a break. That's great.
Mm-hmm. And, and kids will learn different things at different speeds and at different levels. I was having this conversation this weekend, actually, where someone says, well, how do you know if they're at grade level? Well, I'm their parent, so I'm going to have a pretty good idea where they are. I mean, I may need to look at curriculum to sort of see what grade level might be. But they said, well, what if they're behind in math? And I'm like, well, in a brick and mortar situation, they would be jumped up to like grade 6 if they're performing at a grade 4 level. But that doesn't mean that they understand the grade, 4 and 5 information. It just means they're pushed up to grade 6. So I can teach, as you guys are saying, to a level of competence and build and help them grow. And it may be at a faster pace or it may be at a slower pace, but it's at the right place for that child, for that subject at that time.
Yeah, it's actually really fun to see in the child because you can have them excel in, I don't know, let's say reading, and they can be miles ahead in reading, but yet they don't want to do other parts. And so that's okay. You cater to their reading, you keep pushing them forward, and then you still work on the hard stuff and you plod along. It eventually evens itself out. And we're all wired that way. Even as adults, we all excel in different things and we're not very good at other things. And, I'm not a mathematician. I never was. I don't desire to be. But I love all the other things, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think of, the Bible verse when God says some are hands, some are feet, well, we all have to use our hands and our feet and our eyes and our ears, but some of us excel at being hands, some of us excel at being feet and doing, things. So while there's many things we have to know, the areas that we excel at, let's highlight those and let those kids excel.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a really good point. Because sometimes we can get so fixated on the academics of something in the child, and then they still need the groundwork for life. They absolutely need to know how to read. They need to count. And let me tell you, when you start introducing money and how to save and how to set up a bank account and you working and having a job, and if you have $50 in your bank account, now you can have whatever you want to buy. Whoa, suddenly math becomes very relevant. And you can teach that in grade 2 already. Like, if you, I don't know, I mean, like I take my grandkids and I take bags of cans and bottles. In BC, we can take them to the bottle depot and get a refund. And that can add up fast. And so I give them the choice. Do you want to go to the dollar store and spend it on candy? Do you want to go to the dollar store and buy a toy? Or do you want to do half and put the rest in your piggy bank? Or do you want to put all of it in your piggy bank? And they start to learn and realize, if I have they learn what a dime looks like and a nickel. And because a lot of times they think the nickel is worth more because it's bigger. It's really funny to watch, actually. But those early math concepts, you start talking about money, wow, the world just kind of becomes more important.
Mm-hmm. And we had one child who overspent when we went away somewhere, and we didn't realize till afterwards. And then she owed us money. She was like 6 years old, but she owed us money. She owed us $20. Well, do you know how many bottles you have to collect to make up $20, and how many $5 is taken out of your birthday money and stuff? That lesson has lasted her whole life to this day, where she's like, I am never, she was like 8 years old, or no, it was during that time. So she was still 6. She walked up to someone and she said, I never want to be in debt again. And I'm like, what a concept for a 6-year-old to learn. Fabulous.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're going to wrap things up because we've done lots of chatting here. We've had some good interaction. We've had some good questions go through. And again, if you are listening and you have any more questions, you can contact me at homeschooling@actionforcanada.ca. And you can reach out to HSLDA and become a member there as well. Patty, do you have any closing comments?
You know what? We were talking about this earlier. Homeschooling is a great life. Doesn't mean every day is a great day, but homeschooling is a great life. And I really encourage all of you in your homeschooling journeys, your passions, and just may God bless each of you in your journey. May you just lean on him and go strong.